Welcome to Point Blank here on KTN News. At Point Blank, opinion is free, but facts are sacred. Today we have a great program and to have a critical look at pre-independence Kenya, the democratic and social development of this nation. Where are we and where are we going? I've brought one of Kenya's most eminent thinkers, strategists and scholars. In order to see whether he's up to Point Blank, let's look at what my guest has done before.
Peter Kagwanja is a Kenyan intellectual, advisor, reform strategist, and policy thinker on governance, security, and African affairs. Professor Peter Kagwanja is the chief executive of the Africa Policy Institute and a former government advisor. He was born on August 8, 1963 in Murang'a County. From the early 1990s, Kagwanja was associated with Kenya's pro-democracy movement through his research and writings in the media and was one of the founders of the University Academic Staff Union, UASU. As an immigrant in South Africa between 2003 and 2008, Kagwanja was in the team of experts that provided technical backing to the intense policy processes that led to the creation of the African Union and its peace and security architecture. When Kenya's opposition ascended to power, Kagwanja became part of the technical team that re-engineered and realigned the country's foreign policy and strategy to the challenges of the 21st century. He became government advisor on the post-2008 reform agenda and strategy, managed its successful campaign for the new constitution, and provided strategic thinking towards the transition to the post-Kibaki order.
His Excellency the President will waive it.
Kagwanja is a public intellectual who has authored many articles and books, including Kenya's Uncertain Democracy, the Electoral Crisis of 2008 London. Kagwanja received a Bachelor of Education degree in History, Politics and Philosophy and a Masters of Arts degree from Kenyatta University. Kagwanja won the Fulbright Fellowship to study at the University of Illinois, where he obtained a doctorate degree specializing in history, politics and international law. In January 2010, Kagwanja headed the PNU think tank that provided technical backing to the government negotiators during the watershed constitutional retreat by the Parliamentary Select Committee in Naivasha. Professor Peter Kagwanja has also become an insider in the Jubilee circles as one of the public intellectuals defending the government policy.
Professor, karibu and welcome to Point Blank.
Thank you, TJ. I think you are very generous. I'm still growing as a scholar.
But you know, over the years, we've had a lot of discussions with you on polemical, expository, sometimes apologetical matters touching on the body politic, this nation, and the architecture of the republic. I want on the onset to go to you, to the years just before independence, the so-called Majimbo debate that brought Kenyatta head-to-head with Jaramogi Odinga. What do you see and what do you remember about the initial Majimbo debate in the 60s?
The Majimbo debate has always and will remain a very sad debate because, on the one hand, the triumph of Majimbo shortly in 1963-64 literally signified the triumph of the empire to shape the future thinking about the ex-colony. and that essentially was the triumph of Lancaster House debate.
But Ronald Gala disagreed, because Ronald Gala and Jaramogi Odinga were saying that these are ethnic groups that suit the British way of life of governing us as ethnic groups, other than units of governance. So Majimbo became blood from the beginning.
Because it was identified for what it was, that it was basically an attempt by the empire to shape the future of a periphery, our next colony. And that's why, from the onset, Majimbo was contentious. Now, if you move beyond that, then the fact that it is African against African that were debating Majimbo, it also signified something else. The collapse of the nationalistic consensus. The unity of the leaders that had brought us that far had collapsed.
But then Jaramogi argued, and that was one in his book, Not Yet Uhuru, that his problem was not on the idea of ethnic, not the idea of blocks which are economic for prosperity. His problem was that Kenya would remain a divided ethnic country if Majimbo was actually regionalized, because of blocks live in different parts of Kenya. So in the west part of Kenya or the central part of Kenya, it became an ethnic agenda as opposed to be a development.
And that is what the architects of the empire wanted it to be. They wanted to talk about ethnic groups versus ethnic groups, minorities versus majority, regions versus regions. It was just a continuation of the imperial thought of divide and rule.
So fast forward to 1966, the little general election ensued. Odinga leaves Kenyatta. Kenyatta teams up with Daniel Moi of KADU. They come together and form an imperial presidency. We see the office of prime minister removed. The imperial president comes, centralization of power, and KANU becomes mama na baba. And as we move on through the 60s towards the death of Kenyatta, Moi continues with the imperial presidency up to the Section 2A. How do you see that journey and 2A and beyond?
I think the whole thing is that there's a continuities and discontinuities of the imperial thought, the fragmentation of our political class, our political elite, the increasing kind of decline of the nationalist thought, and the consequence was more and more disunity amongst our people. Ethnic ideology became really the axis around which our thinking was organized. And to the extent that even when you thought about Kenya, if you thought about the Kenyan nationhood, you were literally talking about which group is organizing with which.
So point blank, how did Mwalimu Nyerere win that argument? He was nationalistic. Tanzania arguably is one of the most unified, one language speaking neighbor of Kenya. Why would it have failed the imperial presidency here and succeeded in Tanzania? What did Nyerere do that Kenyatta did not do?
It is not what Nyerere did. It's what the British did not do in Tanzania, which they did in Kenya. Here, the colonial settler, as they were departing, they conceived themselves as a people who have to exist in Kenya after independence. And the only thing you needed to do is to safeguard the rights of minority and therefore create a consciousness about minorities versus majority. Look at our case. It is not about ethnic groups that are majorities. It is about minority versus majority. That's what Majimbo was about. And we were convinced, in order to be protected as minorities, you need to be balkanized and you need to be regionalized.
So Professor, what you're saying, on the one hand, Kwame Nkrumah is pulling Jomo Kenyatta to the Pan-African movement, bringing Africa as a closer, unified continent. Mwalimu Nyerere is making Tanzania unified. And here in Kenya, we are still looking at our village. That I'm a Teso, I'm a Bukusu, I'm a Griama. And that is what you're saying has happened for 35, 40 years.
And that's a paradox of the Kenyan thing. That first, here, we don't talk about ethnic majorities or minorities because none of the Kenyan ethnic group can win or can pull an election victory by itself. Therefore, you need to be, to bring as many ethnic groups together to win an election. And it is at that level where you begin to see democracy beginning to become a nemesis, in the sense that in order to win a democracy, you have to mobilize your ethnic group. But then you bring it to the marketplace. And therefore, ethnic groups have become, chattels or products in the marketplace.
Look, so you're saying devolution, even post Kenyatta, post Moi, devolution post 2A, went into discussions at the Bomas of Kenya, the compromises of the IPPG, giving birth to the Bomas draft. The Bomas draft going up and down, and a compromise was made in 2010. The compromise of 2010 created 47 counties, far too big from what was. I know you were at Bomas of Kenya. I remember you were there representing the PNU. And my question is, what did you lose in that discussion? Because instead of having 18 administrative units, which Kenyans can afford, you've got 47 tribal units, which are making governors rich every day because they are not governing. All they are doing is looting public in many of the counties. I wouldn't say all of them, but most of them.
I think during the Constitution, particularly the second part of it, after the 2007 election, serious thinking went into redefining Kenya into the future. I don't argue against the 47 counties because they're economically viable. If you look at Mauritius, Mauritius is way, way, way smaller than Murang'a. It is way, way poorer than Murang'a County. I mean, Nakuru is basically larger or equivalent to Rwanda. So the size here is not.
But in Mauritius, Professor, arguably, it is not divided into ethnic cocoons. They are regional development blocks. And I would say that has happened in most federalistic models in the United States, in Switzerland. Federalism does work. But it works where blocks are economic. They make sense because of governance.
Now, I think what we need to highlight is not the size or whatever. It is essentially the fact that Kenya came to realize that power sharing, if I may say, empty power sharing is not enough. You needed to share wealth. And how do you share wealth as a country? We put it into the Constitution that 15% of our national revenue must go to the grassroots. Counties are models of basically distributing
Professor, as we
That's
move on,
all.
your last word on devolution, as we move on, is devolution the cast that will dictate to whoever wants to be head of government or head of state in Kenya that they must compromise with ethnic chauvinism in order to build coalitions, as you say? Is devolution the answer or the cast?
I think we need to be intellectually superior. We need to be a little bit more sophisticated to know that ethnic groups are as old as the hills. They are not going anywhere. And politics is here to stay. How do we now organize our politics in a manner that our ethnic groups do not become the nemesis, the enemy, the dividing factor, but they become building blocks to the nation of Kenya?
Professor, let us move on. Wacha tuende kwa siasa ile kali. Unajua, the other day in Chatham House in London, the Deputy President, His Excellency William Ruto, has entered the constitutional debate. Scholars before were saying that he has been silent because he has been not comfortable with the murmurs that the referendum that is coming is of a certain shape and size. The Deputy President has said, and I would like you to put it as you understand it, that he would like to see a different approach towards the constitutional referendum. How do you see and what did you take from his address at Chatham House in London?
Well, it means that London still matters, that you make the most poignant point, your most profound statement in Chatham House, and not in Kenyatta International Conference Center. That's interesting. Another interesting thing is that I think the Deputy President has accepted that constitutional debate is not yet over. We are not yet Uhuru in terms of the constitutional dispensation. I think that's
so the Deputy Prime Minister, President does not want to see a Prime Minister, does not want the opposition to be left hanging. What did you read as the key issues that he is raising on the debate?
Well, he raises 6 points about how he wants to organize. One is a strong opposition and a weak presidency, and a strong deputy presidency taking the place of the Prime Minister. This is what he says. One, that a reorganized executive with the president. Two, you need the Prime Minister, you need the Deputy President to be in charge of Parliament, government business. And that's the prime ministerial position. Then what you want is an upper house, Senator's upper house, and so on. There are those 6 points which we will get to discuss in detail.
Well, in order to crack here, point blank, whether Deputy Ruto will succeed in his bid to reform the discussion on the referendum, or the supporters of the handshake who prefer the creation of a prime minister and 2 deputies, and the mechanics about all that. Only here at KTN News with Professor Peter Kagwanja after the break. Point blank on KTN News, the eminent professor of political science, Peter Kagwanja, deciphering the referendum debate in 2 parts. Professor, the handshake proponents are widely known to believe in a 5-point approach to the referendum. They look at the executive arrangement where there is a president, and as I understand it, the president will have some powers and reside at State House, doing things like foreign affairs, in charge of the military, and probably overseeing devolution and some other functions to be debated and discussed ahead of the question of the referendum. That there will be a prime minister and 2 deputy prime ministers, and one will be in charge of parliament and another management of government. And that there would also be a need to relook at the term of the president so he's not elected in every year. So you might have a 7-year presidency, etc. Without getting to the details of what that would be or not, it is clearly the retaining of some imperial signs of a president, probably delegating his powers to a head of government, and a head of government accountable to parliament. Now, on the other hand, you've got William Ruto's proposals, which are that there is an imperial president with a deputy, and everybody else shares the spoils in parliament, particularly. One as head of opposition, and the other as leader of government business. So in William Ruto's view, the imperial presidency is supreme. In the handshake deal, they think more or less about a decentralization of power through the prime ministerial creation. How do you see it? And what are the similarities about this before, during, and after the growth of the constitutionalism in Kenya?
That's heavy. First, the handshake model. I think there is no consensus within the supporters of the handshake model about what form of government is going to emerge. I think that's an ongoing debate, and we must admit that.
But you must know.
You can identify
you must
shades.
know. I also have some connections here.
Sure. But there are shades within the handshake model. But the overriding factor is the following: that Kenya must be united. That's very clear. Second, that Kenyans don't want to have this diarchy, the leadership of 2 people, 2 tribes, 2 regions. That diarchy, Kenyans are tired of it. What they want is an inclusive system. And by inclusive system, it's not just the numbers, because you can have the tyranny of numbers, but then you have the 2017 double election, which cost the country trillions of shillings, and basically almost bring our economy to the knees. How then do you manage this kind of inclusive society? It all boils down to what we were discussing earlier. How do we manage our ethnicity? How do we manage our diversity within the political context? And the only thing that is left to us is to go to the Constitution and see what we can do with it in order to bring a benign power, an inclusive power, and something that makes every Kenyan feel that they're represented in the system.
I think the pro-22 Ruto camp will argue, Professor, that all that the handshake team is doing is trying to change the goalposts so that by recreating the executive structure, there is no competitive advantage, they would argue, for their candidates. So that if you were to completely re-engineer the constitutional arrangement, then a president and a prime minister are not defined in terms of term limits. They are not defined in terms of how the 2010 constitution looks at. And like has happened in Russia, the so-called Putin model, that all is available, that political players who have run before, who are currently in office, and let me be very straight, the elephant in the room, President Uhuru Kenyatta. There are those arguing in the Ruto camp that this is a way of making Uhuru Kenyatta a factor in 2022, Professor.
No, I think we are not done with the handshake model, and that's where you're bringing the Putin model, which is part of the handshake model.
Is that not the end?
Yeah.
Is that not the means to the end?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I have said before and again that Uhuru Kenyatta may depart as president, as constitution demands. But he's not going anywhere. Unless you remember Mugabe asking the...
Professor, point blank,
yes.
you are saying Uhuru Kenyatta is not going anywhere.
No, because he's not going anywhere. That I can tell you for sure. He will depart as a president. You might decide to whatever, but he's a factor.
So you're telling Deputy
politics.
William Ruto and his team, and the proposals they have, which seem that they want Uhuru to go, you're telling him point blank, Uhuru Kenyatta is going nowhere. Professor Peter Kagwanja, I'm asking you as a scholar, as a strategist. You were at the heart of PNU and the Kibaki Tena campaign. You wrote it. And I'm saying to you, are you saying point blank that to this country, Uhuru Kenyatta is going nowhere?
And there is a reason to why I'm saying so. Because it took 20 years for the people of Mount Kenya to create Uhuru Kenyatta. And Uhuru, there are very many capable people below him, but there's none that has elevated that can basically put his house in order. And therefore, the challenge here is not whether Uhuru want to stay or want to go. We are back to 2013.
Well, Professor...
we are back to 2013.
Professor, here in your book, and Professor Uhuru Kenyatta, A Legacy of Democracy and Development. In nearly 500 pages, Professor, you have written extensively about Uhuru Kenyatta. And I really would like you to, there's one extract about Uhuru that and I would like you to read an extract where I've read you talking about Uhuru born a prince, born a man of opportunity and rare circumstance. And before we delve into your thinking, what is your synopsis or your bird's eye view of him?
I'm saying that Uhuru Kenyatta is the closest one comes to a prince in Kenya. And I am saying that he was the son of Kenya's first founding president, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. He is evidently the appointed political heir to the second president, Daniel Arap Moi. He is a godson and successor to the third president, Mwai Kibaki, and agreeably, he is Kenya's most influential politician and statesman of his generation. You cannot wish him away in a minute.
So let me then ask the hard questions. If Uhuru, in his greatness, would have to choose politically and choose carefully, there is two clear issues. He had the ICC challenge that saw him go to defend himself at The Hague for more than 6 years. And hand in hand with him was Deputy President William Ruto. William Ruto's supporters will argue that they have a political debt to be paid because as Uhuru was being persecuted, as Uhuru was vying to be president, he had to stand with the man who stood with him, being Ruto. Then the proponents of the handshake are saying that Raila Odinga's debt is a greater debt. Jaramogi had a handshake with Jomo Kenyatta. Raila said Kibaki tosha. Raila joined a government of national unity when you are at PNU with His Excellency, the retired President Mwai Kibaki. And now he has shaken Uhuru's hands. If you're saying that Uhuru is a statesman, exceptional statesman, in your eyes and being fair to history as a scholar, why would Uhuru choose the handshake route and not the route that reconciled him with Ruto at the ICC?
Because Uhuru realizes, like every other Kenyan, that one, you have to bring an inclusive government. And I want to put it on record that this is not about Uhuru versus Ruto, or Uhuru versus Raila, or Uhuru versus Mudavadi, or Uhuru versus Kalonzo, or Uhuru versus everybody else. It is about Uhuru and Kenya.
What if I put it to you?
It's Uhuru and Kenya.
What if I put it to you, and I'm sure the viewers, when they see the graphics during the show, they will see the time Mama Ngina received Uhuru at Gatundu on the onset of going to the ICC. Do you not think that the experience of the ICC, what it did to Uhuru the man, Uhuru the family, do you think that because that route of bloodshed and destruction was so traumatic that he has chosen to be of a higher level? Could it be that the handshake has only come at a time when Kenyatta himself has decided he would rather go through bringing together a country bloodless? Do you think the impact of the ICC could have a role in his moving towards the handshake rather than a confrontation of Kenya?
When he was going to ICC, and I'm now disclosing something, I wrote an SMS to himself and I say the hotter the fire, the harder the metal. I believe that from ICC, Kenyatta was reborn, a stronger nationalist, a person who understands the mental map of where Kenyans are going today and possibly a century beyond, and a person who has nothing to hold back when defending Kenya. That's all.
So in raw political terms,
Yep.
Kenyatta and his Agikuyu people and the Gema community he is the head of, that's his political base, went through some traumatic position through the ICC, and they made regional compromises. In the devolution, Majimbo matters I was raising earlier, and came to bed with Rift Valley to make a coalition that won. Now, are you saying that Kenyatta is moving out of that prism of devolution as we know it and moving to a wider state? And are you saying that the challenge that is facing Odinga and Kenyatta in the handshake is to remodel devolution or Majimbo ethnic coming together as we know it?
I want to disagree with your characterization of Kenyatta as, you know, Egikoyo and that. I mean, he's apart from Thabo Mbeki, he's the only other person who has been invited in his own capacity to the G7, previously G8, in 2 consecutive terms. He's the only person I have known to be invited by President Xi Jinping of China to visit him once, twice, thrice, just to be beside him when he's having his international forum. I mean, Kenyatta is an international statesman. So the achievement here is that it has been done in less than 6 years. Within his first term, he moved himself and Kenya from pariah state and a pariah leader to the most celebrated leader in Africa. Remember, if you saw the body language between President Kenyatta and President Donald Trump, you would have known that he has made it. So characterization of him as a Kikuyu, as a leader.
Professor, I must put it to you that Kenya was glued to the television when President Kenyatta made 3 visits to Kisumu. The first one was to launch the Hyacinth clearing venture, and then the other one he had breakfast with Baba at his home in Bondo.
Yes.
And to cap it all, the very soft-spoken, unknown, so-called brother is Moho Kenyatta. In fact, people say he is the one that Uhuru speaks to last at night. Went to church with Baba and then went to pay his respects to Jaramogi. Are you saying that behind these international credentials that Uhuru Kenyatta has, and those international credentials may make part of the handshake, are you not saying there seems to be a coming together between the Odingas and the Kenyattas that every Kenyan can see? Are you dismissing that as a scholar? Intellectually, are you saying that shouldn't worry opponents of Raila like Ruto? Can he not be worried by those signs?
I mean, it's one of the most celebrated international statesmen that you know, Nelson Mandela, a very, very international figure who told us in his book that all politics is local. That's what he said. Now, I think what Kenyatta's visit to Western Kenya, Nyanza and Western Kenya itself, is simply saying what Obama would say. Yes, we can. We can unite this country, irrespective of the region, tribes, and everyone. So it is not about visiting individuals or dining with individuals. It's about dramatizing the Kenyan nation.
If I were to summarize Professor Peter Kagwanja, I would look back at the Chinese proverb that says to the team of 2022 that ambition without knowledge is like a ship on land. And the ox is slow, but the ass is patient. Point Blank returns shortly. Point Blank on KTN News. With me, eminent professor of political science, Professor Peter Kagwanja, who has, in fact, played a critical role in the writing and the development of the PNU position towards the 2010 Constitution. And among the things that came out of that Constitution, Professor, was the 47 counties that you support and say are working well for Kenya. And I take you for your word that Uhuru Kenyatta is a statesman. I take it to your word that he has a special place to play. I take it in your word that there are those who want Kenyatta to play a bigger role in Kenyan politics. But I, for one, have a problem with the president on one issue. And this issue is called Mike Movie Sonko. President Kenyatta is presiding over a country where we have arguably one of the most dysfunctional county governments in the history of mankind. You are talking about a county that has over 60% of the resources of Kenya. He has 2 cabinet secretaries that are confirmed. Everybody else has gone. The deputy governor's position is not there. There is no coherent, effective way to run the monopolies of Kenya. If Uhuru Kenyatta was to triumph in Beijing, as you say, he triumphs, as you say, with American heavyweight Donald Trump. And he cannot be able to deal with Mike Movie Sonko and get rid of him. Why can't Kenyatta use the opportunity of the handshake with Baba and have him impeached and removed so that Nairobi can become the catalyst, the platform for the so-called agendas you say Kenyatta is after?
I have not done research on Nairobi or Sonko, and as a scholar, I wouldn't put my head on the block in terms of saying who is and who is not working.
We're talking about facts. He doesn't have a viable cabinet.
I agree with that.
He doesn't have a deputy governor.
I agree with that.
He doesn't have a viable policy, does he?
He doesn't have a speaker, or there's an acting speaker. Now, I think Nairobi is the acid test for Kenya in many ways. That it is basically the face of the republic. It is also the melting pot of our culture, our development, and the hope for our prosperity. And therefore, in regard to Nairobi, I think we need to begin to re-engineer. As we think about re-engineering Kenya, re-engineering the constitution, we also need to think about how we're going to re-engineer Nairobi, not to be part and parcel of what you can call the political dysfunctionality.
With the greatest respect, Professor,
yes,
point blank, you have an avenue today to speak to your friend, the president, of whom you've written gloriously well, and to the Prime Minister, retired Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, and those in government who can hear you. If we are going to say we are going to the Kenyan people for a referendum, for good reasons that you say need to be canvassed to the people, will we not need, first of all, to correct what we can that is wrong? And all I am saying is if Jubilee and ODM MCAs came together, would they not be able to hold this governor to account? So at least for the sake of the president's 4 agendas, for the sake of the capital city, we can show Kenyans what we mean by saying that if we have a new structure of government, we're not just going to put people we can't hold accountable.
It is very hard to take a whole country to a classroom, like my lectures at the University of Nairobi, and tell them that this is the right thing to do. I think Sonko is a lesson to Kenyans that democracy produces readers, those you want and those you don't want. And therefore, when you are talking about Sonko, you are talking about the phenomenon of democracy. Sonko was democratically elected with a majority of votes. Now, the lesson for Kenya is that it is not just the rhythm and the drama of election. It is about the quality of election that you have. It's about the choices that you make. And as they said, choices have consequences.
Professor, as we move on.
TG, live with the consequence of the choices you make. You might be talking about Mike Sonko, and I'm sure he has his own view about what he's doing in Nairobi. I am sure you're going to invite him here, and he'll tell you that perhaps what you are saying is wrong. But let me say this.
I'm not sure we could understand each other. The language is a bit advanced.
But let me say this, that in our devolution, and if devolution is going to succeed, TG, we must also begin to think about the quality of leadership we put to governance.
And that's the point. As we move on, I want just to make clear that President Kenyatta won the votes.
Yeah.
But because of the political reality, he shook the hand of Raila Odinga in order for the nation state to move forward. And today the Building Bridges initiative that may lead to a rethinking of our laws, constitutional, legal, and administrative, can only happen because the handshake was important to developing the country beyond the election. And I have nothing, I don't have a brief against Sonko. I only live part-time in Diani and part-time in Nairobi. And the metropolis, the center of the capital of Kenya, cannot be measured against the grand four agenda the president has. And if the president wants me and other Kenyans of intellectual realism to agree that he wants to leave a legacy, he cannot leave the Michael Sonko legacy in Nairobi. Having said that, I wanted to ask you about other things. Wiper. There has been quite a bit of development in the Wiper Party. There has been a mutiny led by Governor Professor Kivutha Kibwana, Charity Ngilu, and Alfred Mutua. Alone, each of them are not much, but together, one cannot ignore and wish away that mutiny. Kalonzo yesterday was saying that he envisages working closer with Jubilee to the extent that he even wanted to increase the presidential term, but we don't have time for that today. But with regard to the mutiny in Ukambani, is it real?
You don't want me to comment about my in-laws. You know what it means in Africa.
Yeah.
You don't comment harshly. I can only say the following. I think if you look at what is happening in Western Kenya, people reaching out to each other to unify. If you look at the handshake itself and what it meant, it's basically going an extra mile to reach out to your political challenger and basically unite for the sake of Kenya. One would say that at this time in Ukambani, whatever views one may be having of Kalonzo Musyoka, it doesn't make a lot of sense to begin to think that you're going to eclipse him or maybe remove him from position. I think there need to be a kind of a coming together of the leadership in Kenya. And you can see I'm being diplomatic because I don't want them to take away my wife.
No, I understand. But let me then ask something about the gravitas towards Kenyatta from Kalonzo. The silence now of Wetangula, Musalia Mudavadi seems to be treading water. Is there seemingly, and rightly so, a realization that 2022 is a distance away, and now everybody must have a rethink? Do you kind of feel that somewhere around the country things are coming down, and people are beginning to think it's a bit early to get into the ring?
At every time, it is always good to give a country what you can call a moratorium. You want to give a breathing space, a cooling moment to the country. We've come from a double election, and I thought that the most sensible thing to do for all the politicians across the country would be to basically give Kenya a moment to cool down before we get to the 2022, which is going also to be extremely hot because it is supposed to be a kind of a change of guard.
Right.
And in a change of guard,
yes.
You expect...
In fact, I wanted to discuss that change of guard because a lot of Kenyans do not know that governors who have served their second term are not eligible under the current laws, constitution, to run again. And one of the issues that I wonder your view, what will happen to that law? And do you see a situation in where those people in office will try and put spanners in the works? You know, the fact that you could only serve 2 terms as governor, and that would, you know, the most prominent ones, I can name them, many of them, you're aware, don't have other current law to run again for governor.
I think the governorship in Kenya mirrors the presidency. So it is basically, you know, a presidency lead small, if there's such a phrase, it's small. Now, all the laws governing the change of guard at the national level mirrors what is going to happen in the counties. So if you are a governor, you served 2 terms, that's it. You can change to something else. And I don't think there's going to be any major challenge to that particular law.
So my worry, Professor, going back to after post-Kenyatta politics, my worry about after the President Moi's reign in power, Mwai Kibaki's reign in power, and now Uhuru Kenyatta, it seems to me that Kenya has become torn between a capitalistic society and a socialist society. There seems to be an increasing paranoia towards giving everything free. And the country has become, in my view, intellectually confused. Free primary education, free secondary education, pesha kwa wazee, YNS, NYS will create jobs for all young people. Government will give you jobs. Government will give you maternal health. Government will... Let me ask you, where in the world? I have not seen, other than in the Stalin communist time, or Mao, Zhao Mao, What is happening to this nation that people, even those you think have a capitalistic background, through both the third, fourth president and the second president, there seems to be going back. You know, we started with Maziwa Anyao, which is very good. Now you have Pesa ya Wazee, which is now, people are saying, very good. Then you have free secondary education, very good. Where will we reach all these things? Where will they take us? And do you think the country and the people will be able to afford being able to give things that are free from the state?
I don't think it's the concept of free that we should underline. We need to underline the ideological direction of our state. When Kenyatta came to power in 2013, he decidedly chose to have a developmental state. And developmental state means that the state is going to intervene to ensure that none of our member of our cluster or no section in our community is left behind because of this factor or the other. In 1965, sessional paper number 10 spelled out that Kenya is an African socialist country. And African socialism, although it was demonized at that time, simply meant that we have to intervene on behalf of the weaker sections of the society. Therefore, this is not affirmative action for the old people. It is simply doing what we need to do, look after our old people. And moving to the future, I think what we are saying is that we are going to perfect our welfare state. And welfare means that if you have an accident today, you can count on this country to look after you for the remaining part of your life.
Professor Peter Kagwanja on Point Blank, before I let you go, the leadership you see now, in exactly a minute or so, what do you see are the viable leaders? What is there for Kenya in the future? Who are the people as we come down to the end of the process? What do you see ahead and the political competition? Who are the people in the ring?
I see two things. I see the people who are already on the field playing the soccer and who are likely to be there in 2022, irrespective of what happens. Of course, there is the president, the deputy president. There is Raila Odinga and his two friends, Kalonzo Musyoka and Musalia Mudavadi. They will be there. There's a third player who has been on the periphery there, but is there, Gideon Moi. You can ignore him, you may not ignore him, but he's a person you cannot wish away. He'll be there. So that's the league I see at the top of the country. Then there's an incoming league, the league that is working to succeed. What we call them the Young Turks of 1992, the Young Turks. They are Young Turks coming here. James Orengo and others, Nyong'o and everybody else there. You can mention them across the country. In Central Kenya, you can.
Professor,
but the top league is the Big Five and the Young Turks.
Asante sana, Point Blank, KTN News, every Wednesday. Asante for watching. Its opinion is free. Facts are sacred. My name is Tony Gachoka. Thank you for watching.